main source of Jew hatred, its anti-Semitic threats, 89% from the extreme political right. And in many ways, these are neo-Nazis, white supremacists. This is where the most dangerous physical threats are coming from. 85% comes from the extremism in the name of Islam. And again, this is American Jewish perception, but it's also accurate that, for example, in France, where there's a high degree of anti-Semitism, much of it is done and perpetrated, the physical violence, by Islamic extremism, or in the name of that, I should say. And then 61% of American Jews recognize that the extreme political left is also a source of anti-Semitism. And one thing we are constantly reminding people is that we need, especially when we meet with elected officials, that people need to call out anti-Semitism, not just from the other party, but from their own party. That it must remain a nonpartisan issue, it cannot be weaponized. And that we need to recognize the different forms it takes in these different settings. So let's move on with what can we do about it? And this is the part of, I think, that is so important for us to really spend more time on. I created this little acronym just as a way of remembering, how do we keep Jews safe and what role do we all play? So let's start just first with security. And of course, the top concern is our physical security as Jews. So as we said before, Jews have been avoiding certain places, events, or situations out of concern for their safety. And one point I want to make is that the numbers are 2019, 25%, 2020, 31%. You saw on an earlier slide that this actually went down in the 2021 survey, but we think that was just because of COVID, people weren't going out. But what can we do to make sure that the Jewish community feels safe when they come? And this is something I know you as a synagogue have committees, are constantly working towards as a community in so many important different ways. But we as an advocacy organization and you as advocates can help. And so I just want to provide this overview for you of just the money that is being poured from our government. This is not just a Jewish issue. If Americans can't worship or go to school or go to their community centers in security, this is not just the Jewish community who should pay the price tag for this. This is our government's problem as well, that we need them to solve. So in 2020, the Department of Homeland Security provided a grant for nonprofits that would range from 60 million to 90 million. In 2021, thanks to the advocacy we as a Jewish community have been doing, it increased to 180 million. This is not just for Jewish organizations, this is for all different, especially religiously affiliated organizations. And in 2022, you can see we are jumping to a much higher degree of aid that is not just for money to harden your synagogue, security cameras, bulletproof windows, all of the different things that we desperately need, but also programs that will combat hate and extremism and improve law enforcement procedures for dealing with hate crimes. There needs to be a much larger investment, as we all know, to counter the threat of extremism in our society. So you can join us in advocating for those funds and some of the legislation that we're promoting. And then just looking at California, we work together, AJC, with other organizations, Jewish organizations across the state in something called JPAC, the Jewish Public Advocacy Committee. And through our efforts working with the Jewish Legislative Caucus, that's Jewish legislators, state legislators, we have been working to get the state of California to give more money, to give directly to the institutions that need it. And believe me, when Rabbi Ezra said that I was the director at Stanford Hillel. Stanford Hillel had 11 doors. We had 2 buildings. It was so nerve-wracking and difficult to keep it safe, especially because, as you and all of our Jewish organizations want to do, we want to keep the doors open. We want to be inclusive and welcoming to everyone. So this money was so important. 50 million was allocated after our advocacy. And one thing that I just want to point out, though it sounds like a lot of money, California, as many of you know better than I do, has a $75.7 billion budget surplus. So we need to be asking for even more to protect our communities. So that's security. So keeping Jews safe, let's move to awareness. I asked this question before. AJC's survey of the general public showed that almost half of American Jews have either never heard the term anti-Semitism, or they've heard of it, but they don't know what it means. And some, I think, rightfully are now talking about Jew hatred or other ways that we can be just more blatantly talking about anti-Jewish bias and bigotry. But for the time being, the word anti-Semitism is the word that we've been using, and that we need to educate people what it means. Some of you were with us on our fight for the past couple of years to make sure, for example, that anti-Semitism was not just mentioned, but defined and taught about as part of the California Ethnic Studies curriculum. I know you're going to be having a workshop on it and a couple more seminars, but like Alina Kaplan and others, we are continuing and monitoring and working as this issue is happening in many other states, Boston, Seattle, Minnesota, other states where it's popping up, and we are working with our colleagues there to address ways do we educate the public, starting with K through 12, about what is anti-Semitism. So this slide is just, like a waltz through history to try to say, folks, we need to do a deeper dive into understanding the history of anti-Semitism and how it is manifesting in contemporary ways. I don't have time tonight to go through this speed history, but we need to be learning it. Going back to Christian anti-Judaism that still in churches in Palo Alto around Easter, themes of it are heard, that Jews are accused of killing Jesus Christ. And that is despite decades of the Jewish community working closely. And my colleague and Rabbi David Rosen, who spoke actually at CPJ right before the pandemic began, he met with several successive popes to try to change the way the Catholic Church is teaching about this doctrine. But still, it's a pervasive anti-Semitic trope that Jews killed Jesus Christ. And it's something we addressed throughout our history. It targeted us, and we need to address it now. Jews were accused of kidnapping and murdering Christian children to use their blood in rituals. That's called the blood libel. Jews were accused of spreading the Black Plague through common drinking wells. That trope is called poisoning the well. Jews were blamed for basically anything, why something went wrong. And we see that today, 9/11, Jews were blamed for that. This moves into political anti-Semitism and the conspiracy theories that were launched through the spread of the Protocols of Elders of Zion, and even promoted in Soviet anti-Zionism. And, it's amazing. I mean, I even see it still today. We can talk more about contemporary examples, but ways that there is a neo-Marxist approach to the anti-Israel, anti-Jewish animus that we're seeing even throughout the ethnic studies curriculum. And there is also racial anti-Semitism. Despite what Whoopi Goldberg says, the Holocaust, as we know, was a racial, was racism against the Jews, starting with the Nazi propaganda and the Nuremberg laws. Jews were seen as an inferior race, leading, of course, to the most horrific of all, the Shoah. And there's even a different form of the ways that anti-Semitism is kind of a shapeshifter. It's a virus that mutates. There's anti-Semitism in Muslim lands in the way that Jews had a dhimmi status, and now what we see in pervasive anti-Israel propaganda. So what does all of this tell us? It tells us that anti-Semitism is diverse. As Deborah Lipstadt said, my teacher, who we hope will soon be confirmed, as our head rabbi of anti-Semitism in the State Department in the US. Anti-Semitism punches down, it considers Jews to be inferior, and it punches up, meaning that Jews are seen as controlling the world and controlling the banks and the media, and Jews are considered to be non-white in the racism of the Nazi propaganda. Jews are considered to be the quintessential white oppressors in far left extremist anti-Semitism. We need to begin to really have and understand the nuances of the ways that anti-Semitism operates today in our society. So, we wanted to believe that America is different. And I love this slide because when I was at Brown, I went every year to Newport, Rhode Island, to the Touro Synagogue, the first synagogue in America, and we would read out loud Washington's letter to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island. It's beautiful language that America, we can do better. The New Jerusalem, citizens of the United States have a right to applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy, that we will give bigotry no sanction, persecution will have no assistance in America. It's lofty, it's an ideal, of course we know, and we debate it, and we are doing the deep dive and better understanding of racism and the historical systemic racism of our country's past, to know that this is just part of the story, and yet it's a part that we have to hold on to. Not just for American Jews, but for all different groups in American society. There is an enlarged and liberal policy of that bigotry will have no sanction for anyone. Of course, we know, even for Jews, that America has not been different. And here you have a screed. Henry Ford started a newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, and this was in the 1920s, where he published a separate pamphlet, The International Jew, the World's Problem, based largely on the protocols of the Elders of Zion. It was translated into 12 languages, this pamphlet, and the curse of anti-Semitism was spread throughout largely white supremacist groups in America. And to the right, you have, an example of a recent white supremacist rally. I think that might have even been from Charlottesville. So I want to give you a snapshot of the ways that some of these ancient anti-Semitic tropes show up in contemporary ways. But this is all taken from a fantastic resource called Translate Hate, which you can find online. And I think we even sent out to you before this. And we use this when we share it with elected officials, with diplomats, whoever we're meeting with. We want them to also be educated to understand these nuances. So one of the anti-Semitic tropes is the conspiracy theory. It's a belief that some covert but influential organization is responsible for a circumstance or event. The Jews are, as I said, controlling. Jews are to blame and Jews are controlling. And I could have put a lot of pictures up here. The one here we have from this idea that Jews caused the plague, and it's a woodcut of Jews in Germany in 1348 who are being burned. Horrifically, and a lot of the language of this the extraordinary pain our people have suffered throughout history because of this hatred under the name of these kinds of tropes. So to the right, what do we see? The anti-Semitic flyers that were distributed in my neighborhood, in our neighborhood, around the country, just in the past months. And it was not, with all respect to Rabbi Ezra, it was not just one deranged individual, it's a group that I don't want to mention. We don't want to further publicize or mobilize people to, give them the attention they crave. But at the same time, we do need to understand they're part of a network of white supremacist groups that are blaming Jews. Here it's blaming Jews for COVID. So let's look at another example of ways that these ancient anti-Semitic tropes reappear now in a contemporary way. So here we have a picture of a woodcut from 1493. The blood libel is the accusation that Jews murdered non-Jews, such as Christian children, in order to use their blood in rituals. And this began in England in 1150 with a false accusation, but then made its way through Europe from community to community. And here, this again, Simon of Trent was a child who was missing in Italy, and the Jewish community was blamed for his murder. To the right, you see here, this is just horrific. The Israel soldier as a child killer is this anti-Semitic trope in a new form. This cartoon comes from Hamas's children's magazine in 2009. And it, as you can just see from the image, it points to all of Israeli soldiers as baby killers. And I here was searching this afternoon for a flyer that it was in the Stanford bathrooms when I was there. And it was a flyer to advertise Students for Justice in Palestine. And it was a Rambo-like Israeli soldier with a machine gun aimed at a Palestinian baby. And it was so frustrating because the Jewish students, just in the privacy of the bathrooms, were exposed to these contemporary manifestations of old anti-Semitic blood libel tropes, and they were not allowed to take them down. It was considered to be part of the free speech of the university. And we worked through how students could complain about it through various means. Similar with the flyers, I was in touch with District Attorney Jeff Rosen. It's very difficult. There's free speech in this society. We cannot necessarily arrest the perpetrators of these images, and yet we need to stop them. We need to recognize and educate others about why they are such a sensitive nerve for the Jewish community. Here, there's one other one, which is a Palestinian rally, just in Los Angeles, less than a year ago. And it's hard to see there, but one of the flyers, one of the banners they're carrying, if you can see it, is Netanyahu, and he has a Hitler mustache, and he is killing a Palestinian baby. He's holding he's holding a Palestinian baby that he's eating. So this image reappears and reappears. And we as Jews know when we see it in our kishkas that this is not right. This is anti-Semitic. So just looking more broadly, I often think American Jews are we have blinders on. We think about our own community. We also have to open our eyes to the global concerns of our brethren around the world. And even just since the most recent conflict in May in Gaza, we saw anti-Semitic incidents explode. It was probably one of the worst times of my career, just the number of resolutions that what was happening in companies and social media around the world. But we have to, and of course, we're often in touch with our Germany, where they've had incidents, physical violence. I could go on for quite a bit. This is AJC's wheelhouse in the ways that we are working together with Jewish communities. We have offices around the world to counter this in many different ways. If you have questions about that, we could talk about that too. Anyway, I'm still going on about what do we need to educate ourselves about, build awareness about, and what do we need to educate others about? And I think here, especially in the Bay Area, we know that part of our work is addressing anti-Semitism on the far left, which again can sometimes portray Jews as the quintessential white colonialist oppressors. And in that way, it's all the more important to just constantly be aware of both the experience of and recognize the diversity of the Jewish community, whether that's the hundreds of thousands of Mizrahi Jews who fled from Arab lands, whether it's the Ethiopian Jews and other African Jews in Uganda, Indian Jews in Cochin, whether it's just the Jews of our own community. The 2018 San Francisco report of the Jewish community showed that I think it was something like 24% of Bay Area Jewish households can consider themselves as having at least one member who is a person of color. And then, of course, we've got Seinfeld and what the wonderful diversity of our Jewish community is something we should celebrate, and also use, frankly, to just explain to people why some of the ways that anti-Semitism targets Jews is absolutely incorrect. So, awareness, what can we do? I just want to talk for a few minutes about some of the ways that AJC has taken this on. We, for example, launched a Mayors United Against Anti-Semitism campaign, where we asked every mayor in the country to sign on to a pledge against anti-Semitism. And I'm really proud and pleased that the mayor of Redwood City signed on, along with something like 43 other Bay Area mayors. The mayor of Palo Alto still has not signed on, and this is something you can still ask them to do. And it's great because once they sign on, we can turn to them when I was just in touch, for example, with the mayor of Danville, because they have the COVID flyers there over the weekend. And we build a relationship with them and we ask them, can we come and do a training for you about anti-Semitism and what you can do as elected officials to keep our community safe and to speak out against it. We also take mayors on trips to Israel. Mayor Libby Schaaf will be going. Mayor Pete Buttigieg was one of our famous alumni. I'm thinking of him because I saw him in the State of the Union address. But rising star mayors across the country go on AJC's Project Interchange to learn for themselves what is the situation in Israel. And that's just one example of the ways that we're working with local legislators, but we also are working with state legislators and with federal legislators. As an example, with state legislators on Holocaust Yom HaShoah this year in April, we'll be doing a training statewide for our state legislators and their staffs, which is important, just about anti-Semitism and what they can be doing about it. I can't tell you how many elected officials we've met with as part of our AJC advocacy who had no idea in June, July, the way the Jewish community was experiencing the intensification of anti-Semitism. I know that our social media feeds were lighting up with Colleyville. Others have no idea. It's pretty shocking, but we have to be on the front lines educating people about it. I mentioned Translate Hate. It's a resource that goes through all of these different examples of ancient Jewish anti-Semitic tropes and how they manifest in a contemporary way. And we share this with civic leaders. And the hashtag Jewish and Proud, these are just an example. We did show up for Shabbat, Jewish and Proud, all kinds of hashtags, just as a way, especially on social media, to rally people in support of the Jewish community. So I want to share this another example I'm really proud of for AJC. We launched with our Muslim Jewish Advisory Council together with our Asia Pacific Institute, launched an amazing video series of cartoons. There's 7 of them so far, and already 45 million Arabic speaking viewers have seen these. And they're simple and they're short. And it's just basically trying to counter the information. Who are the Jews? Is Israel only for the Jews? What is the Holocaust? We want at least to begin, it may be a drop in the bucket against some of the education and propaganda that happens in the Arab world, but we have to be trying. So as another example, and I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be speaking about this, but we will be working with the largest Muslim majority country in the world to be training teachers at madrasas, the Arabic Islamic schools, about Judaism and about other religions as well. So as we teach about about the Jewish community, we're also advocating together to teach about Islamophobia and teach about the Muslim community, to teach about the Hindu community, to teach about all of the different groups, but also sharing in particular as much as we can to counter, the virulent and just vicious animus, which we unfortunately are subjected to. All right, fellowship. I'm going to just now turn, I need to see what time it is. What are we doing? Fellowship, folks, means that we build our coalitions. As Martin Luther King said, it's a fundamental truth. Jews cannot ensure equality for themselves until and unless it is assured for all. We know that the most important work we need to do is to reach out to others, reach across the aisle to heal the divide. AJC is a nonpartisan organization. We're committed to a very centrist, bipartisan approach to and addressing anti-Semitism, both on the left and the right. Committing to a bipartisan support for Israel is such a high priority, but also doing this with other ethnic groups, other religious groups. So AJC started a Latino Jewish Leadership Council, and that works together with our Latin American Institute, which just again, many more interesting stories about the ways that they were engaged with the most recent elections in Chile, which has led to a very alarming president there who's very anti-Israel, anti-Jewish. But building a strong alliance with the Latino community could not be more important at this time. Here is another example, working with congressional leaders to develop a bipartisan congressional caucus for Black-Jewish relations. That was announced at AJC's Global Forum, and we've asked all of our local representatives to join that, who would be appropriate for that, and also launched a Black-Jewish Unity Week together with the National Urban League. There's lots of questions about how do we build strong relationships with various African-American groups, with Black groups, and especially because we see sometimes strains of anti-Semitism within those groups. And that's all the more important reasons that we need to be strongly building relationships, listening, learning, supporting their interests, but also making sure that the Jewish community's voices are, that the Jewish community is not being demonized through efforts to achieve racial justice for other groups. And particularly also this Muslim Jewish Advisory Council is just doing extraordinary work. I mentioned the videos, the work they're doing in Muslim-speaking countries around the world. This picture is from just before the pandemic. You see David Harris along with some of the most prominent Muslim clerics from around the world who came to Auschwitz in really a historic pledge to counter Holocaust denial in the Muslim world. Just as an example of some of the ways that we can be working together with other groups, also to be countering Islamophobia, the Muslim Jewish Advisory Council. Some of you may have even come. We had a joint, they met here and we did a joint iftar a few years back. We advocate together in Congress for legislation that prevents hate against against all groups. And it's very meaningful to walk into a congressional office, not just as the Jewish community, but as the Jewish community and the Muslim community, asking to counter, to bring more money, more attention to hate crimes against both of our communities, against all of Americans who are being targeted right now. And of course, that includes the Asian community, which has faced so much targeting. And we could talk about just in California, some of the ways that we've been addressing that through our state legislation. So lastly, empowerment. The number one way that we Jews can fight anti-Semitism, as we all know, is just to feel proud, to celebrate being Jews, and find joy in our Jewish lives, to teach our children, and celebrate with our own community and other communities the beautiful heritage that we have. And one of the things I'm most excited about coming up is we're going to be doing a diplomats Passover in April, where we're bringing all of the Bay Area diplomats just to learn about Passover and celebrate the freedom stories. As one example, there are many. We do a beautiful diplomats Hanukkah, where we have diplomats lighting Hanukkah candles and learning about and celebrating our holidays together with us, as we also are interested in their national days. Just recently, sadly, I was at the Ukrainian National Day celebration in San Francisco. We stand up and we show support for the other communities, the other nationalities in our community, and we ask and we invite them to share in ours. I know you're going to hear more about sharing your story when Ty comes and the great work they're doing with Hunani. Empowerment is also about recognizing anti-Semitism and raising awareness. I want to just highlight right now the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism. We spoke about the fact that almost half of Americans don't know what anti-Semitism is and means. And I have a few slides I want to talk about IRA, but taking action, it's up to you to educate and influence within your networks. We are looking right now, particularly for leaders in the tech community, who within the tech community are interested and willing to speak out when they're finding anti-Semitism. For example, just within their company internal chats, or are finding ways that anti-Semitism is bubbling up in various ways, particularly within the DEI framework. It's a fascinating whole other area, but some of you may have seen when within Google, one of the directors of diversity, equity, and inclusion was actually found to have posted on a blog like a very terrible anti-Semitic statement that Jews, I think, have a murderous appetite for war, something like that. And he was not even fired from Google. And he was just moved to a different position. And so after that, we went within Google and we're working with the head of DEI there, along with advocates within the company, in order to educate them to see that within diversity, equity, and inclusion, one also needs to understand the nuances of anti-Semitism within a company. So if there's anybody interested in working with us on that, we are really eager, especially that is a very fruitful area within universities, within, as we know, this is the way that this will be being promoted sort of through K through 12 education. It's an important area for us to be focusing on. So I just wanted to take a few more minutes to talk about the IRA definition. It's really simple. It's just, like 2 sentences, and then it has 11 examples. And one of the most important things to know about this is the most commonly utilized definition. It is adopted by the State Department, the Department of Justice, over 32 countries around the world. It has been adopted by the Global Council of Imams. And we wanted one definition the Jewish community could agree on as a guide. It does not chill speech. One can still criticize Israel, but it does provide some guidance to help educate people about how do you recognize anti-Semitism, because it is so nuanced. So here are some of the examples, right? If you make a mendacious or dehumanizing or demonizing or stereotypical allegation about Jews, that's anti-Semitic. If you deny the Holocaust, that's anti-Semitic. If you exaggerate the Holocaust, and I could have showed you cartoons about each one of these, or statements that we, flag when elected officials make these. Denying Jewish people their right to self-determination. Those are areas where it begins to be a little bit more controversial among the Jewish community, whether or not that should be considered anti-Semitic. But all this says here is that these are examples where there may be anti-Semitism. It doesn't, it doesn't prescribe it so much as describe when it might be evident. Using symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism to characterize Israel or Israelis. We think it's unfortunate that there's been a proliferation of so many different definitions rather than having the Jewish community coalesce and advocate around one definition. This is something AJC has been working on for literally decades. One of my colleagues wrote this definition. But we understand the importance of having deep discussions about what this means, and even the disagreements within the Jewish community. And I think maybe you'll hear more about that from Ty. But this is something that at least our organization has been promoting, that states should adopt it, that local city councils can adopt it, the universities can adopt it. And again, it doesn't chill speech, it's really an educational guide. If you have questions about the IRA definition, I'd be happy to speak with you about that. So I just want to add a few more things about engaging locally. These are some things that you can do. You can contact your local mayor and elected officials. Have they signed on to the Mayors United Against Anti-Semitism campaign? Are they speaking out against anti-Semitic incidents? Did they make a tweet or put on their Facebook when the flyers came out? Are they calling out anti-Semitism within their own party? Not just, saying, oh, anti-Semitism is on the right. It's only from the Republicans if they're Democrats and vice versa. Party politics. We could have a whole seminar just on this. We have been fighting these county and California State Democratic Organizing Committee resolutions. They are promoting animus towards the local Jewish community, including, for example, one that targeted Jeff Rosen personally, which was just despicable. There's one that's coming up in Alameda County, and there's right now going to be a fight in March about whether the statewide Democratic convention, the platform at the convention will, and I'm getting a little tired, sorry, if that will include some anti-Israel resolutions. Year after year, AJC has been on the front lines with other groups, making sure that the onslaught, 15 resolutions against Israel are all defeated. But we need to do the same, and it's coming up this March. Local school boards and superintendents, you'll learn more about that and talk more about it with your discussion about ethnic studies. But are they considering the liberatory ethnic studies contracts and curriculum? Are they ready to skillfully address anti-Semitic incidents, or will they just sweep it under the rug? And tech and corporate DEI departments, can you be helping to influence your HR departments to educate about anti-Semitism and global inclusion? And here, just as an example of an AJC resource that we give to elected officials, because it is so difficult sometimes to get it right when there's anti-Israel criticism, and we want them to sometimes stand up and say, actually, this is over the line. This is promoting animus and actually leading to anti-Semitic actions against the local Jewish community. So just, Rabbi Ezra, I'm almost done. I really want to thank you for the plug for AJC and invite everybody to get involved. We just opened a fund today to support the folks to humanitarian relief for Ukraine. And what we do high-level diplomacy, legislative advocacy, coalition building with other religious and ethnic communities, and strategic communications. And we do engage advocates around the globe with 24 regional offices, 13 overseas posts, and then these international partnerships. So with that, I'm going to stop the screen sharing and just, I know that you want to go into small groups, but I wasn't sure, Rabbi Ezra, if you wanted.
Let's start with questions. Let's start with questions. Actually, a couple came up in the chat, one from Ruben and one from Lori. I'll actually let them unmute and share their own questions. But boy, what a breadth of material you covered in a very short time. Thank you so much, Serena. Ruben, do you want to ask your question? And Lori?
I didn't really have a question. I just felt that the one poll that showed that among Jews, the greatest fear of anti-Semitism was that it came from the extreme right, and only second to that was from radical Islam, and much lower than that was from the extreme left. And my gut reaction to that was, and as a Jew who's left-leaning myself, although I would say maybe I'm more moderate than that, but I think that poll reflects not the accuracy, it reflects the fact that Jews are generally left-leaning, so they see that the threat comes from the right because that's the enemy camp. I will say this, I can't think of one instance where an extreme leftist, where somebody on the extreme left showed support of any kind for Israel. I can think of a lot of examples where people on the extreme right, not the ones that are marching in Charlottesville, but others on the extreme right are strong Israel supporters. So I think that to have a poll that shows that kind of a result is not a reflection of reality. It's a reflection of where the people who took the poll are coming from.
I think you're exactly right. We estimate, or data shows, that about 70% of Jews in America are Democrats. And we too are subject to that same, problematic bias, confirmation bias, if you will, of believing that our own party is better. And so therefore, the people on the left we're more liberal, we're more tolerant. There's less hatred and bigotry within our own left-leaning party. I'm speaking for those, of the 70% Democrats. So I think you're absolutely right, Ruben, that's probably why that those numbers are skewed. And it doesn't actually reflect where anti-Semitism is coming from. It's a perception of the Jewish community.
Right, which for me makes the ask that AJC does so powerful. It asks that people on the right talk to those on the right when it comes from the right, and the people on the left talk to those on the left. And I don't see that enough. So I appreciate that. Lori, and then Joe here has a question/comment. So Lori Fisher, do you want to unmute?
Sure. Serena, did you want to finish your thought?
Well, I was just going to say, one thing I'm really proud about is not just being nonpartisan, but the style of advocacy we do is diplomatic advocacy. And it's really important to be listening and learning and working in a diplomatic way to heal some of the civil, both polarized, but also just the nature of civic dialogue, of civil discourse in our society has been so degraded. So the way that we are having these conversations is also important.
Thank you. So Lori, and then Joe, and then John.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Serena, for this presentation. I think both my questions were asked earlier. You probably addressed them. It was my question about the demographics. As a marketing person, I can't help but think hard about who's been asked the questions based on what the answers are. And I'm very sure AJS has done a lot of work on the younger generation. Under 30s wouldn't even be on Facebook to answer that question. So my big one was on the unraveling of anti-Jewish versus anti-Semitic versus anti-Israel. I think we have, I dare say, confusion even within our own tribe on these things. Crossing political lines, crossing geographical lines, certainly within the US, a huge opportunity for us to step up to help define these things. People who think they hate Jews, but it's because they're against Israeli politics. And so I'm just wondering, what is the effort to try to unravel those within our Jewish order?
Lori, you were coming in and out a little bit. So I think your question is, within the Jewish community, there is differences in the ways that we understand what is anti-Semitic and what is anti-Jewish. Is that it?
I'm so sorry about my poor signal. Anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel. I think phrases have really become the root of a lot of misunderstandings and worse across Jews and across religions and across ethnicities. And I'm wondering if that particular kind of focus area for the organization.
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, I'm not even sure where to begin. I mean, I think sometimes there are boundaries at which there's it, as a Jewish organization, as a Jewish community, we sometimes set up, a big tent, and we want to be inclusive, but that creates also a dilemma, a paradox, because there are some groups, for example, Jewish Voice for Peace, or anti-Zionist, where it's just not aligned with both our values as our particular organization and what we believe to be sort of a mainstream American Jewish position based on data. So I would say yes, within certain parameters, we're absolutely having those conversations. This morning, in fact, we had an AJC all-staff training, really with doing a deep dive into evangelical Christians' understanding of why are they so pro-Israel? How is anti-Semitism emerging from the far right and the Christian communities? How do we dive in and better understand that? I think if that answers your question, I'm not sure.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you, Serena, for your presentation. It was lovely. I raised my hand mostly in response to what Ruben was saying, which I think it's very interesting. There are a lot of ways to divide up the pie, and I think Lori hit on some of it when she was talking about the differences between anti-Jewish religion versus anti-Jewish people versus anti-state of Israel. And as far as left and right are concerned, I think it's interesting that Ruben brought up that there is often more support for Israel, more on the right. But I wonder about the motivation for that, and if that doesn't come from some of the Christian nationalism that's been significantly on the rise, and it's not so much a support for Israel because they approve of Israel per se, but because it plays into their own personal mythology about the role Israel plays, in their vision of the time to come. And so I think in terms of certainly, I think it's interesting. It seems like the anti-Semitism that we get from both sides of the political spectrum comes from different places. Certainly, there's a certain number of people who just don't like Jews as an ethnicity. They don't trust us, and for whatever reason, they've been fed, all kinds of fiction over the years about who we are and what we stand for. But, trying to say Jews are, fill in the blank, it's like, taking any group. And so, I find it interesting. It's all a very difficult question because you've got all of these different rings and there are overlaps, in the Venn diagram. And so, a lot of the mistrust on the left comes from the fact that while Jews may, say, oh, well, there's anti-Semitism, but that we don't really have a claim to saying, well, anti-Semitism isn't really racism because so many Jews have light skin privilege, right? That somehow some people's suffering is worse than other people's suffering, and people who don't suffer as much, should just be quiet and not raise the problem. I'm constantly surprised how there's so much pushback from people on the left, and I think a lot of that comes from people who are doing exactly what Serena mentioned, unfortunately conflating problems that they have with the behavior of the Israeli government with all Jews everywhere. So that's my comment.
Serena, did you want to amplify on that a bit?
Well, I'd rather hear from others. It was an excellent point, and it's just wonderful to interact with folks who are there in person and online. What a great hybrid model.
You know what? It's good. We need to get more people at people's homes, but we've got another week to do that. John Levinson. John, we can't hear you.
Okay. Hi, Serena. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you.
And the thing that I want to point out, I've been a very active Democrat in the party. I've attended probably about 25 of the last state Democratic conventions. And in every convention, there always seems to be some resolutions that come before the resolutions committee that are really very anti-Israel. Some of them, they range from mild to very severe. In the originally, most of them were promulgated by Arab Americans who were active in the Democratic Party. Interesting enough, had a lot of the same values as we as Jews have as part of democratic politics and democratic issues in this country. And we used to meet them, those of us who opposed their resolutions, and we used to talk with them and everything. And we were lucky in opposing these resolutions because we always had some tremendous allies who helped us along. In particular, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi was always a very, very strong ally of ours in helping us defeat these unfortunate resolutions. Unfortunately, what has seemed to have happened is it has moved on from Arab Americans, although they are still very strong in it, to other people. And in some cases, we find Jews who are promulgating these unfortunate resolutions that are very anti-Israel. I would not classify them definitely as anti-Semitic, as more very anti-Israel and using some typical means to describe the Israelis. And those are easy to defeat. But the other part, and every year it seems to get a little more difficult. So I just wanted to bring that up because it is a problem. It's a strong problem. This coming weekend is going to be the State Democratic Convention. It is all going to be virtual. So it's going to be interesting how people are going to be able to speak or deal with these particular resolutions. The good thing about the resolutions is that once they are passed, nobody ever hears of them again. So it's what you would typically call feel-good resolution. If my resolution passes, I feel good and I can claim the Democratic Party supported this particular issue. Anyway, thank you for being here.
Sure. Serena, did you want to give a thought about that?
Thank you to John. He's been fighting the good fight for so many years. And what you've been at this longer, but I don't know that we've seen such an onslaught of these type of resolutions in the county organizing committees as we did until just this past year. And also, for example, in the teachers' unions and sort of heading to a more grassroots level of organizing.
So Alan Fisher has a hand up, and then Diana from the mothership has a question or thought. So go ahead, Alan.
Hi, I find the IHRA definition very compelling, but I know that in the Bay Area, it gets a lot of pushback. In fact, you will hear next week from Ty Gregory that the JCRC went and developed its own paper on anti-Semitism because it got too much pushback on trying to use this IHRA definition. It gets pushback, it seems, especially from the left, who finds it somehow stifles anti-Israel criticism and therefore it can't be used, and it conflates the two, which it really doesn't, but that's the going story about it. And I don't know how you found the battle trying to promote this globally accepted definition in our area.
The first thing I have to say is I have extraordinary colleagues in the Bay Area, in the ADL, in the JCRC, in our synagogue community, and nothing would be better than all of us speaking with one strong voice about these issues. It's so needed. We're a small minority of the California population, and we only defeat ourselves when we are caught up in these divisions. So I believe that they are principled disagreements. Machloket b'shem shamayim. We sometimes have policy disagreements, and as you heard, our organization has been advocating for the IRA definition. It was accepted by the National Association of Federations, the National Jewish Public Affairs Committee, the ADL, has promoted this as a definition, and there's a reason why we would be a stronger voice if we could all agree on one definition. But there's understandable pushback in the Bay Area, and I think that they managed the situation well by bringing many voices to the table. We had a hand. We were involved in crafting that final consensus document, and you can see some of our influence in a footnote about the IRA definition. But I'm with you, Alan. You know that I am. We've been talking about some of these things since I was at Stanford. And I'm grateful for your leadership and your advocacy.
Thanks. Go ahead, Diana. Oh, Treja.
Hi, thank you so much for this timely and important talk. I have a question about how do we protect people that do want to come forward? So, today speaking up can get you fired, can get you canceled. And so, I'm not in the tech world, but say I was, and I came across something that was blatantly anti-Semitic. How do I speak up and keep my job, right? That's what's going on right now in the Bay Area. And, it's hard to find moral courage when you have bills to pay. And that's just the reality. So what, if anything, is AJC doing, to help protect folks that do find the moral courage to speak up?
It's an extraordinary question. I think it gets to the heart of it. How does each one of us find within ourselves the moral courage to skillfully bring these issues to others' attention? And that, I think, is ways that organizations like ours can be a resource. ADL is phenomenal. That's why people call us all the time. I'm dealing with this issue at my school or within my company, and we together talk through it. I think one of the major, some of the guidance is, again, skillfully being able to bring up these issues in a way that you're mindful of how and when and where you can be heard and be protected. Always finding alliances, finding allies. It's much easier if there's several people who are coming together within a company saying, we don't like this, or several parents. The first question I always have is, have you spoken to other people who are similarly situated who might want to raise your voices together? Then, there's, depending on the situation, it's so important to have bystanders, people who are not Jewish speaking up. One of the most important things we did in the ethnic studies fight was hard to stand up just as a Jewish community and say this important curriculum, this important effort, movement to promote racial justice through schools is flawed. Nobody wanted to hear it, and they did not want to hear the Jewish community squash it. So we worked with other ethnic groups, the Koreans, the Hindu Americans, the Armenians, many others who also were similarly uncomfortable about aspects of the curriculum, and together could say, hey, this is not representative. And I think in every situation, you can try to look around and say, who are the non-Jews who might have some reason to share these concerns or might be uncomfortable, and vice versa, that you're there for them. When they know that you're up, standing up if there's any kind of racial bigotry or discrimination in a respectful way, right? Again, a diplomatic way. And then, there's anonymity, there's getting people like organizations like ours to be the ones who speak out, to call them out, to call the influentials. I just look at many friends here who Hillel sometimes would stand up at Stanford, but sometimes it was much more important to get our major donors and our alumni and the faculty to speak out. So who are the influential people, the allies within the whole network that can help raise the important points that you want to raise? I just heard such a beautiful example from someone who was very upset because trying to remember the specific story, that they were trying to bring an anti-Israel some kind of anti-Israel resolution within their workplace. And the person had worked on a project with the person who was bringing the resolution. And she said, I want to talk to you. I want you to know how I feel about this. And, just sat down and had coffee and said, I want you to know that I don't know everything about the situation in Israel. And if you're going to bring this resolution, I'm going to suggest that we also bring an expert who can really just educate the whole community, the whole workplace about the situation. Because it's not enough to just to bring this sort of one-sided position. I think it's important that we all learn together. And I thought that was a very skillful way of doing it. And in the end, the person just backed down and agreed not to bring that resolution.
Great, thank you. That's great. John, one last question, and then we'll close up.
Wanted to end on a very pleasant note. I will tell you a little story. For many years, my wife and I and our kids, we've had a Hanukkah party at our home for the neighborhood. The kids come, the families come, we serve them safgoniyot, and we light the candles, we tell the story of Hanukkah, and all the kids immediately gravitate to the dreidel game, and we buy M&Ms that they can use as money, and it's very pleasant. And I'll tell you one of the outcomes. One day, one of our neighbors came over the house, and she's the mother of one of these boys. She's a teacher of catechism at a Catholic parochial school. She says, I have to tell you something. She said, my son was in school today, and the teacher got up, and the teacher said, I want to tell you some of our neighbors celebrate a different holiday than Hanukkah, than Christmas. They celebrate a holiday called Hanukkah. And she explained a little. Then she says, how many children in the class celebrate Hanukkah? So 2 Jewish kids stood up, and her son stood up. His name, Matthew. And the teacher knew that he was not Jewish. And she comes over, and as teachers do, she looked at him. She says, Matthew, are you sure you celebrate Hanukkah? He said, oh, yes, we go to the Levinsons, and I play with the dreidel, and I have safgoniyot. So let me just end on that note.
There you go. Thank you, John. That's a great story. And I think that, I think all of us have to find our own voice and our own activism and advocacy. And for me, this series, if it's just learning about, the amazing diverse ways that, AJC addresses this, that's good. But where it really works is if all of us share with one another what our own work's going to be, because there's a lot of work to do on lots of levels. Serena, I'm going to ask you a final question. I mean, as I, preach and teach about this, it's certainly working with organizations. It's being someone who does reach out to officials, to people of other faiths. The message of have pride in your Judaism and don't let anti-Semitism define in any way or take away from your Jewish pride and your Jewish connection. I mean, that's kind of been what I've been, and I got that from Deborah Lipstadt, who that's the essence of her book. If you had to say, here's 1 or 2 things that a synagogue should be doing, what would you advise us to do?
Oh, come on, you give me a softball. Have a rabbi like Rabbi Ezra, and, have these kinds of educational series exactly the way you're having them, where people can be in one another's homes and having the real conversations, taking some time to digest and think through how, as a synagogue, can we move forward. given the array of challenges that we're facing.
So thank you. I do want everyone who's on this session to be thinking about what it is that we should be doing, being in touch with one another, being in touch with the lay leaders who are helping put this together, being in touch with me, but know that this also has to come from the bottom up and just not the top down. That's a healthy place. So let me ask people to come next week, where we'll hear from Ty Gregory. Let me thank you so much, Serena. It was really a really important night. And in many ways, I think hearing what's going on does empower, and hearing what's going on does kind of take away that overwhelming sense of disquiet and discomfort, and say, we're doing things, and we're doing important things, and we're doing strategic things, and we can do things. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Take care. I'll leave this on if anyone wants to give a final hello or goodbye, or good to see everyone. Take care. Hi, Steph. Take care, Linda. Hi, Cheryl. Hi, Rana. Take care. Take care, Levinsons. Hey, Joe. Take care. Tell me. I just got it.
Okay, enjoy it because it's a quick read.
Yeah, it's a small book. Bob Goldberg recommended it to me.
Book, and his style is very conversational, so it's
Okay,
it reads
I'm going to
fast.
read it on Shabbat, and I'll call you up, and we'll talk about it, okay?
Well, I just love that it's a book that, I mean, he states right up front that this book is not aimed at conservatives. This book is aimed at the left that considers itself as liberal and so it's a book that's aimed at sort of lefties who may or may not be Jewish, to kind of point out how on the left, when we talk about racism and social justice, very frequently you'll get lists of things, and there seems to be one group that consistently gets left out, and it's really about casual anti-Semitism. In other words, not anti-Semitism in terms of, oh, I hate Jews or I don't like Jews or I don't trust them, but sort of this sort of ingrained, where they don't even think about it, where they don't even realize, this is yeah, it's just like, oh, It's an interesting word, casual anti-Semitism. Well, that's what it is. That's why for a great number of people is what it is. And you look at, I mean, for example, I read a great article just like a day or two ago about the what they're calling the absolute racism of the coverage of what's going on in Ukraine. People are saying things like, well, I've been, the news people, and it's been across. It's not left, right, center. CBS News, CNN News, and they've all said things like, what's so difficult about this particular war is that, we're used to going to places like Central Africa or the Middle East, and we see the shelling and bombing, but here we have a situation. These people look like us. They're Europeans. They wear blue jeans and Nikes, and they're white skinned and blue eyed, and it's just so disconcerting. And I'm like, you know what? Why is it that somehow this is more tragic, or people are relating to it? Why? How would the coverage be any different if these people had dark skin or wore turbans, instead of J. Crew and Nike, So, yeah, and so to me, like, that's casual, like they don't, that's casual racism, right? Where it's, you're not really against those people, but it's like you treat the thing differently because you relate to it more, right?
It's like when the pretty white girl gets killed.
Oh, yeah. Where are all the where's all the blanket news coverage when a Native American woman goes missing?
Yeah.
Or a Black American woman goes missing, right? I mean, it's insanity. You know, I'm just so much on the I am so on the people are people train at this point. It's like, I'm just fed up with all this nonsense.